Albert Henderson was used to being considered one of the best pediatric cardiac surgeons in his state. Of course, in order to get where he was, he had to study long and hard. The doctor mastered his profession at the Medical University in California. Many of Albert's friends noted his incredible work ethic and self-sacrifice in cases that involved saving a child's life. But despite his impressive achievements in surgery, Albert's personal life left a lot to be desired. Sadly, the 45-year-old cardiac surgeon still didn't have that special someone in his life to start a family with. Of course, Albert Henderson did date women from time to time. However, those dates never developed into serious relationships. Only one woman managed to steal Albert's heart, leaving a deep, gaping wound in it. Veronica Brown came into Albert's life long before he had achieved his incredible successes in medicine. Back then, he was just a student who still had to finish his studies and complete his internship at one of the city hospitals. Veronica and Albert met by accident. They bumped into each other at a cash register at a supermarket. On that memorable day, Veronica forgot her wallet at home and ended up with an unfortunate situation where she couldn't pay for her groceries. The cashier gave the girl an annoyed look and said, "How much longer are you going to hold up the line for? If you have no money, then why did you even come in here?" In response to the cashier's comment, Veronica gave an embarrassed smile and tried to smooth over the uncomfortable situation. Fortunately, Albert quickly stepped in and helped Veronica out. He unintentionally overheard the conversation and decided to pay for her shopping. "Thank you. I don't even know how to thank you," the woman said, embarrassed. "Oh, there's no need to thank me, miss. It's really no big deal," Albert replied, taking the shopping bag from the woman and helping her carry it. Perhaps it was at that moment that a spark flew between the two, which later turned into a fire of passion in their hearts. Albert and Veronica were surprised at how easy the conversation was and how quickly they felt a mutual attraction for one another. Like a true gentleman, Albert walked his new friend to her doorstep and asked for her name and phone number. The next day, the young people met up and had an unforgettable time together. At that point, the young medical student had already realized that Veronica was the perfect woman for him and that he wanted to spend the rest of his life with her. Albert and Veronica were very happy together, seeing each other every day and feeling confident in their future. Albert felt that Veronica understood him without words. It was as if they breathed in unison. The only issue that made Albert feel uncomfortable was his girlfriend's low social status. In their hearts, his parents didn't approve of their son's choice of a girlfriend from a poor family. But they never spoke about it openly, choosing to take a neutral stance on the matter. Veronica and Albert were in a relationship for about half a year before they started talking about getting married. And thus, when they seemed to be just a small step away from marriage, Veronica suddenly changed her mind. At first, Albert didn't even pick up on the warning signs coming from his fiancée. Meanwhile, Veronica became cold and averse to intimacy with him and constantly complained of a headache. But when Albert finally suspected that something was wrong, it was too late. "What's going on, Veronica? Are you seeing someone else?" Albert asked, worried. Seeing her fiancé's agitation, Veronica looked down and, to his shock, nodded timidly. Albert's mind went blurry. Unable to control his emotions, he started a huge fight, which ended in the couple's breakup. Of course, at that point, the medical student couldn't have known that he had just broken up with the woman that was already pregnant with his baby. This is what Veronica wanted to tell Albert all this time. Being of a shy and modest nature, she couldn't find it in herself to share such happy but also scary news with their fiancé. Veronica understood that the birth of a child would have an irreversibly negative effect on the promising student's career, as he would have to devote all his time to family rather than his studies. Albert won't be able to become a leading specialist in his field, and that's his biggest dream, thought Veronica, welling up. The naive woman didn't feel sorry for herself in the slightest. All she wanted to do was help her beloved, who was still too young to start a family. It's one thing to be dating. It's a completely different thing to take on the responsibility of supporting a wife and a small child. Veronica understood this better than anyone else, as she was raised by a single parent and knew how important parental support was. But due to his own ambitions, Albert couldn't see past the end of his nose, and so he didn't even realize that he unknowingly was the cause of his fiancée's drastic decision. "That's fine, I'll raise the child myself. Grandma could probably help me. It'll still be ages before Albert finishes university," thought Veronica naively. Unfortunately, she didn't suspect that her weak and delicate body would be unable to sustain the pregnancy. The first red flags appeared in the 3rd month of pregnancy, when Veronica felt a sharp pain in her lower abdomen. Unfortunately, she ignored the symptoms and went to seek medical help much too late, and as a result, the baby could not be saved. Those terrible events occurred within such a short time span that Veronica felt as if she was having a night terror, but there was no escaping the dream. It's hard to even imagine what poor Veronica had to go through before she was able to return to normal life. Of course, Veronica thought a lot about Albert during this time, but unfortunately, he was under the impression that she was a cheater and tried to erase her from his memory. Veronica Brown had to go through so much in order to find the strength to move on with her life and start a new relationship. Floyd Thompson came into her life 7 years after the breakup with Albert. The businessman wasn't as smart or cordial as the medical student, but he still managed to charm Veronica, who had already missed being the center of someone's attention. Floyd won the woman over with his down-to-earth approach to life and confidence in his future. The businessman suggested that Veronica move in with him right away, and half a year later, he proposed. At first, Floyd was courteous and gentle, but later he changed into a cruel and possessive person who was used to walking all over people for his own financial gain. However, when Veronica was finally ready to break it off with the heartless businessman, she realized that she was pregnant again. Barely able to hold back her tears, the woman broke the news to her husband. "Well, that's actually good. I'll definitely need someone to help me with the business in the future," Floyd said indifferently. It seemed as if he wasn't talking about his own son, but about yet another employee. Unfortunately, this wasn't the only thing that worried Veronica, who still remembered the unfortunate experience with her first pregnancy. Therefore, throughout the entire pregnancy, the woman had the doctors keep a close eye on her, and they did everything possible to make sure that the tragedy didn't happen again. But despite all the efforts of all the top specialists, her son Ethan was born disabled. Cerebral palsy. The diagnosis sounded like a punishment to poor Veronica. "God, what have I done to deserve this? Punish me instead of my own son," whispered Veronica with tears in her eyes, holding her tiny newborn son tightly in her arms. However, the worst reaction by far came from Floyd, who looked at his firstborn with undisguised disapproval, as he was meant to become his heir and the face of the company. After the birth of their son, Veronica and Floyd had managed to stay together for another 7 years, after which they realized that they could no longer bear to live under the same roof. One of the main reasons for their divorce was little Ethan, who always required a lot of care and attention. After her breakup with Floyd, Veronica decided to change her life completely and moved to New York City, which she always thought of as her dream city. She bought a train ticket, which was meant to make her dream come true. Of course, Albert Henderson couldn't have known any of this, but at that very moment, the man was on his way to an international cardiological conference in New York City. Albert couldn't have even suspected what Veronica had to go through over these 15 years apart. Having taken his seat on the train, Albert closed his eyes and tried to go to sleep to make the journey seem shorter. But not half an hour later, he heard screaming coming from the next train. "Somebody, help! There's a sick boy here!" Someone called out, worried. Albert woke right up. He quickly got up and hurried to where the commotion was coming from. A crowd of people had gathered in the neighboring train car, looking at the boy who was crouched on the floor. The boy's face turned blue, from which Albert concluded that the poor child was most likely choking on a foreign object that was stuck in his throat. Having pushed his way through the onlookers, Albert picked up the boy and then rapidly dropped him on the bench face down. This caused the piece of candy, which the boy was choking on, to fall out of his mouth. The boy started coughing immediately, after which he started taking deep and frequent breaths. Clearly, the boy had choked on the piece of candy, which had almost become fatal. It was only Albert's timely intervention that saved the boy's life. In response to this, the crowd who watched the whole scene unravel sighed in relief and applauded the little boy's savior. "Thank you, sir. I don't know how to thank you," whispered the boy's mother with tears in her eyes. At that moment, Albert realized that the crying woman's voice sounded very familiar. The man looked at the boy's mother in disbelief, as he recognized her as Veronica, whom he hadn't seen in over 15 years. "Albert, is that really you? How is this even possible? What are you doing here?" asked Veronica, still crying. In response to this, Albert felt embarrassed for a second, and then said with irony, "Maybe I'm your son's guardian angel." After hearing those words, no one in the train car could hold back their tears. Of course, they didn't know that by pure chance, the former lovers had met after spending 15 years apart. But the way Albert looked at Veronica made it clear that their love was timeless. At that moment, even Ethan could feel the warmth and kindness coming from his unexpected savior. Veronica and Albert spent the rest of the train ride to New York City together. Just like in the good old times, they chatted about everything, and the feeling was wonderful. Having found out about Ethan's diagnosis, Albert promised to get the boy help through his connections in the medical field. From the first moment they met, he took an instant liking to the boy. But no one was happier than Veronica. She had now found her person again, whom she continued to love with her tortured heart throughout all these years.